side is so funny.
Now, Ashley, when is the break again? It's at 7, 6:45 or 7?
I will stop all of the conversation at 7 o'clock and
Okay.
introduce what the breakout sessions are, then give folks an actual break, and we will start sorting into breakout rooms, and then WREN staff will moderate whatever that discussion is. So you're welcome to stay and get separated into those rooms, or also bow out as you need to take care of your other responsibilities in life. The only person I asked to stay on with me is Beth, to give the closing at 8 o'clock. Well, yeah, right around 8 o'clock. And we already have folks logging in, so that is amazing.
Great.
And I will get started promptly at 6 o'clock, so that way we can maximize our time in our conversation. And I don't know, for those who'd like, you can edit your name on Zoom to include your pronouns, if that's something that you desire to share with the group. It's not a pressure to do it or not, but you can see as I model it on my name that as you are participating, you can do that.
One of our captioners, it looks like, has raised their hand. Do we need to, are they saying hello or?
The WREN as the host should take care of making sure that they have the token to get in there. And then those who need captioning, I will give you instructions right as we get started at 6 o'clock. Thank you, Bethany. And that's a great note that I'll also bring up at the 6 o'clock introduction is at any time, if any of the attendees need assistance, you can raise your hand or direct a chat at the WREN account, and they will take care of your needs that you have. I'm loving seeing all of these people starting to log in. It's incredible to be doing something new and to see participation. And to have baby Vera in the background, just lending her support. I can hear her crying. So can you.
Especially an event in the evening. That can be hard for folks.
Yeah.
It can be, you know, it's tricky to do because folks are like, you know, I want something in the evening because, you know, they're at work during the day, but then in the evening can be difficult because then you've got family obligations.
Yep. It's just making my face hurt from smiling to be able to see all these people starting to come in. All right, it is 6 o'clock and I am nothing but prompt. So I am ready to get us started. Hello and welcome to the first session of the WREN This Together Summit, sponsored by Abacus Planning Group. This session is one of 6 hosted by WREN, the Women's Rights and Empowerment Network. We at WREN have a mission to build a movement to advance the health, economic well-being, and rights of women, girls, and their families. My name is Ashley Lito. I utilize she, her pronouns, and I am the Associate Director of Policy and Government Relations. I'm so excited to bring this session to everyone tonight and want you to know that in this session, you'll hear from a panel of experts who have a range of experience on workforce-related policies, from private sector support to state agency enforcement. We want to make this event and others as accessible as possible. We recognize the issues we are discussing impact all of South Carolina, and as such, we will make every effort to share this information in an equitable way. There are many languages spoken in South Carolina. We are committed to building our capacity for language justice in future programming. This webinar is live captioned. To access the captions, click the closed captions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Captioning is only the first of many steps in creating a space accessible to all people, and in the future, we will continue to work to make our spaces more accessible. If at any time during this webinar you need any assistance, please send a message via the chat function to the WREN account. And now I'm so excited to hand over the conversation to our lead sponsor, Abacus Planning Group, to give us a comment about the WREN Summit.
Thank you, Ashley. We are just so excited to be sponsoring the WREN Summit. We are inspired by the important work that WREN is doing to advance the health, economic well-being, and the rights of women, girls, and families in South Carolina. And as a professional woman at a firm with a female founder, female leadership, and a whole lot of female employees whose work is to empower women financially and promote financial literacy, we could not be bigger cheerleaders for WREN's mission. And while I really wish that we could all be together for these sessions, I'm just so energized by the pivot move that WREN did and the creativity in launching this virtual summit. I think one of the silver linings is the increased accessibility for so many of us to attend these sessions during what has been, I think, a pretty difficult year for all of us. We are grateful for the continued progress and what I know is to come from WREN, that they just what they're doing in our state, and we are so honored to be a part of their efforts. So cheers to that.
Thank you so much, Bethany. And now I'm really excited to introduce you to our moderator for the evening. Beth Ruffin is the Vice Chair of the Women's Rights and Empowerment Network Board of Directors, and she has spent 20 years in corporate America before realizing her dream of entrepreneurship, opening her own boutique consulting firm, The Everyday Inclusionist. Beth is committed to making our world more inclusive through consulting, coaching, and speaking. She's also the host of At the Table, a weekly podcast about elevating the voices of the underrepresented, and her new book, You Belong Here, explores the topic of self-inclusion. Beth believes that everyone has a purpose and has the power within them to impact lives. She is the mom to 1 daughter, and in her spare time, blogs and travels. And so now this session belongs to Beth, and she'll take us on this journey. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Ashley. And I need to update my bio because, as you can imagine, there's not much traveling going on now with the way that our country is. But, again, want to thank everyone for attending this summit. Be patient with us. We're learning, right? But please feel free to interact using the chat or the Q&A. And if we have time, we'll get to some questions from the audience. So first, before I get into my spiel, I just want to recognize that today, September 10th, is World Suicide Prevention Day. And many of us have experienced, this is a hard time right now in our nation, in our country, in our world. And so just want to, put this reminder out that you shouldn't be ashamed if you're having feelings of self-harm or you're having feelings of worthlessness, but please don't hesitate to get help. As we spend this day recognizing those that have attempted or completed suicide, I just wanted to put this reminder out that you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. That's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no judgment, and it's extremely confidential. So I wanted to just make sure that we recognize that on today. So at WREN, we seek to create workplaces that allow for all people to thrive, regardless of gender, identity, ability, race, or ethnicity. And we've got a long road ahead of us in South Carolina, as many of you know. We currently rank 48th in the nation for working mothers, 48th. South Carolina is currently the 5th deadliest state in terms of women murdered by men. In order to catch up to what the typical white, non-Hispanic South Carolina man is paid by age 60, depending on her race, a South Carolina woman would need to work anywhere from 12 to 34 additional years. Our state ranked 12th worst in this country when it came to the number of insured women. Half of all trans women of color who are murdered and killed are in our part of the country, the South. There have been important gains for birth control access, but many South Carolinians still face barriers. And I get it, while hearing this data may seem overwhelming, we're addressing these issues every day through legislative action and private sector partnerships. Some of the wins that we've garnered so far include advocating for and passing policies such as the lactation support and pregnancy accommodations, creation of an anti-racism working group, and published informational guides for our public sector partners, including Power Up the Workplace, a playbook for advancing gender equity. And we thank you for those who are in our network who are partnering with us to help advance this work. So today we're really proud and excited to talk with some organizations who are working with and partnering with us to advance rights for gender, advance rights and gender equity in the workforce. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, and then we're going to go through some questions. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat, and we will make this as interactive as possible. So first is Bethany Griffith, who we heard from earlier. Bethany Griffith is a senior financial advisor and leader of people and organizational development at Abacus Planning Group. She is a 2010 graduate of the University of South Carolina. In addition to her work as a financial advisor, Bethany leads Abacus's work. That's a tongue twister. Abacus's work on people and organizational development, focusing on
Just keeping you on your toes, Beth.
That's right. That's we're on Zoom, so we got to stay awake, right?
Stay up.
Bethany leads Abacus's work on people and organizational development, focusing on supporting, training, and advancing the Abacus team. Bethany serves on the board for the National Association of Personal Financial Advisors and has been an active mentor to new female advisors entering the profession through the CFPR board's Win to Win mentor program for the past 4 years. Finally, Bethany wears the hat of mom to her 2 sons, Henry, age 2, and Charlie, 5 months. Welcome, Bethany.
Thank you. It's great to be here tonight.
Thank you. Leanne Watson, General Counsel for the Human Affairs Commission. After graduating from Furman, Leanne attended the University of South Carolina School of Law. While there, she received the Robert McCormick Fig Jr. Trial Advocacy Award for her graduating class. She began with SCHAC in 2014. Having developed a love for collegiate mock trial as a Furman student, she coaches the Brooklyn Casey team in Lexington County during the mock trial season. She's a certified public manager, a Riley Institute Diversity Fellow through Furman University, Secretary Membership Committee Chair of the Columbia Capital Rotary Club, and the Secretary of the Board for the Midlands Mediation Center. Welcome, Leanne.
Thank you so much, Beth, and thank you for hosting this wonderful event. I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot tonight. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm glad to be here with you all. And then finally, Sandy Jordan, Director of Employment Programs at Able, South Carolina. She is the liaison and facilitator for the SC Disability Employment Coalition, a statewide initiative to decrease employment barriers for people with disabilities. Before working at Able SC, she spent 10 years providing career supports and guidance to individuals with a variety of disabilities. She brings the disability voice to employers by providing technical assistance, troubleshooting reasonable accommodations, and overseeing an annual employer summit. She regularly connects with the community to share the message of employment first and is a founding member of the SC Association of People Supporting Employment First. Sandy holds a master's in rehabilitation counseling from the University of South Carolina, is a certified rehabilitation counselor, and a global career development facilitator. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you so much, Beth, and thanks to WREN for having me tonight.
Awesome. And audience, as you can see, these women, these amazing women have a lot on their plates. So again, we're just so thankful that you all have decided to join us this evening for this panel. So let's dive in. I'm going to start with Bethany. So Abacus is an employer who sees value in supporting their workforce through company-wide policies like parental leave and supporting educational attainment. Why are policies like these important to you?
You know, Beth, I think that I can really divide it into two different reasons why these policies are important to me and why they matter. So the first is our goal, and certainly it's a goal that is evolving as we learn and as we grow, but that goal is to create policies that align with our firm and culture, with our firm culture and our firm values. So in the example you gave about supporting educational attainment, one of our cultural norms is seeking mastery. And so we went into this thinking, how do we create a policy that will support our team in doing this? We know that for a majority of women, the workday does not end when she walks out of the door of our office. You know, she starts her second shift, which may be much longer and much more challenging than whatever she faced when she was within our walls. So we created a policy to provide for paid time off for people to study for and sit for exams to continue their education, knowing that for many women, you know, the expectation that they would manage a full day of work and a full day of family care and then find time to do coursework and study to advance their education is not possible, it's not reasonable, it might not even be healthy. So, you know, I share that example to say there are, of course, some baseline policies that I think are essential for creating gender equity in the workforce. But beyond that, we have a unique opportunity to use our policies as a way to communicate to our team and reinforce our firm's culture, right? So it's just a second tool that we have as a way that we can build our culture and strengthen our team. And then, you know, let's be clear here, we are not simply on our supporting women high horse, although admittedly one of my favorite horses. The second reason that these policies are important is that, you know, there is proven data-backed economic case for making our companies places where women want to come to work and where they want to stay for the long term. We really take ourselves out of the running for attracting the best employees if we aren't creating policies that make us appealing for the best and brightest people.
Absolutely. And, you know, as you were talking about the studying, you know, what that is you're really removing barriers that prevent women, right, from moving ahead as it comes to that mastery that you talked about. And so what would you say to other employers who may be resistant to changes like these?
Yeah, that's a challenge, absolutely. I think the most common point of resistance that you hear when you're talking to employers is that creating these types of policies may be too expensive, or maybe it feels too difficult given their team size or the dynamics in place. And I get that. I totally get that. Running a business, it is a constant balancing act of all these different factors and variables. But what I would encourage employers, especially those at smaller companies where maybe they feel the capacity is not in place to say, they want to provide really like an extended, generous paid family leave after the birth of a child. And that doesn't seem possible. You think creatively about how they can best support their team, considering what might be unique strengths because of how your company is structured or whatever your work environment is. So with that example, maybe you'd love to offer 12 weeks, which would be amazing, a ton of parental leave, but that just isn't viable for your company structure right now. So instead, you could consider a policy where you offer 6 weeks of leave, and then an additional policy where the family member is able to work from home or maybe bring the baby to the office with them. That can extend that bonding period and create some flexibility for the family as they are adjusting to the new tiny person in their life. I would also say, I would encourage people to be mindful of people in different stages of life. So the way that my company can support me as a mom of young children looks different from what a woman in her 50s or a new graduate might need. And so we need to be aware of the uniqueness of those needs when we're thinking about policies. So, maybe that's caregiver support for an aging parent, or maybe it's the creation of a mentorship program to support new team members. And when you think about younger team members, women straight out of college, maybe they don't have families. I just believe so strongly that mentoring young women that are new to your profession or new to your organization and creating a structure so that they have someone that they can reach out to, someone that's going to advocate on their behalf and be proactive in helping them visualize and grow their careers is just such a huge boost for their long-term success. And we're thinking about dollars and policies being expensive, and the bottom line, mentor programs are very low cost in dollars. The commitment is really people's time, but that benefit is going to be invaluable.
I like how you're talking about there's no one size fits all. You
Absolutely
really need
not.
to look at every situation, look at your own organization individually, and find the solution that works best. So speaking of that, we all were faced with a very unique situation we'd never faced before earlier this year with the COVID pandemic. And so would love to hear from you some of the changes that you all have made to your workplace to support your staff during this time.
Yeah, so I think a lot of what we've done is has been pretty common in terms of what I've heard many firms have shifted during this time. We pretty early on moved to a full remote team with a skeletal staff in the office of people that, for whatever reason, wanted to be there. And we're able to safely be in that space and distance themselves. We were lucky to already have the technology in place because we do have a good number of people that were already permanent remote workers, myself included. So that shift was pretty seamless for us in terms of what that looked like. We now also have team members working more flexible hours or just a different schedule that lets them manage their childcare needs or their new homeschool that they're running in their house right now. I would say we have an unofficial competition for the most absurd animal or child Zoom interruption during the week. I'm often, I would say, a strong contender in this. You would not believe the damage my toddler can do in that bookshelf right behind me in like a 2 to 3 minute period. So, the other thing we're doing that I think everyone is just learning how to do together is how do we connect with people? How do we keep people engaged? How do we continue to build that sense of team? We had some new hires at the beginning of the year, and we are just kind of trying everything we can to figure out how do we continue to integrate people into our team and our culture while we're not physically there and not able to enjoy being with each other. So we're doing some weekly huddles where it's part fun, part business. One reason they're always part business is oftentimes it's just a quick update on what's going on, but we continue to be reminded of the importance of just communicate. If you feel like you're doing it too much, you're probably close to doing it often enough, especially in this virtual time. And finding ways to have fun together. So I think last month we did a cooking class together and we did some virtual bird watching. So I think like everyone else, we're just experimenting and figuring out what we can do as we go.
We need to get some tips from you later on. How do you do a virtual, the cooking class I could see, but the virtual bird watching, that one is interesting. So we'll have to.
Well, there's a really great bird watching app we can share with you guys. So
yes,
we're your bird watching people.
Awesome. Thank you, Bethany.
Absolutely.
The South Carolina Human Affairs Commission is our state resource for those who've been discriminated against. And so, Leanne, would you mind giving our audience just a general description of the commission and what your mission is?
Sure. So we are a state agency that was started in the early 1970s out of a lot of civil unrest that was going on in the state at that time. We are modeled after, initially we were modeled after the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, in that we were investigating allegations of discrimination that were primarily in employment and primarily tied to the same kinds of protections that you would find in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Over time, our commission has broadened its perspective, and so now we also are able to investigate allegations of housing discrimination and cases of discrimination in general public accommodations like hotels, retail establishments, those kinds of things. Now, what we would do to try to investigate those cases is we would receive a charge of discrimination from a specific individual that thinks that they have been discriminated against either in employment, housing, public accommodations, based on one of those protected classes like race, gender, color, national origin, religion, disability, age, familial status, and housing, and so forth. And once we get that charge in that someone's claimed they've been discriminated against, we assign it to an investigator who looks at the allegations, receives a response from the person that's being alleged to have been the discriminating entity or person, and then our investigator will follow the facts wherever that charge leads them. Eventually, the investigator will come up with a determination as to whether or not discrimination has occurred, present it to my boss, who is named the commissioner, and he or she currently will make the decision as to whether or not we should move forward in prosecuting the offender if the offender is found to have violated the law, or if we'll issue what's called a notice of right to sue, which basically gives that individual, when we haven't found discrimination has existed, an opportunity to go to court on their own to pursue further relief.
Okay, so let me ask you, what would be the difference of someone coming to the commission versus going to the EEOC?
It is actually basically the same process. So the EEOC recognized our agency in the 80s as an equivalent organization. We're called a FEPA, a Federal Equal Employment well, what am I trying to say? It's a FEPA. I don't know the acronym, what it stands for, but we work hand in hand with them. So if someone files with us, it's akin to filing with the EEOC. And so if someone doesn't like a decision that we render, they actually have an appeals right, so to speak, to take our case to the EEOC, and the EEOC will either uphold what we've determined or kick it back to us for additional investigation. Though I have to say that latter doesn't happen very often. Generally, they see eye to eye with how we found the case.
Okay.
But we both would issue that right to sue notice so that the rights are afforded either under our state law or under the federal equivalent law.
Okay, thank you. And so tell us about what are the most prevalent cases that you see?
Sure. So right now, our single issue cases or single basis cases in employment are primarily still race-based discrimination cases. After that, we see more disability cases than anything else. And then sex would be the third most prevalent case. However, I have to say more than a third of our cases, closer to a half of our cases, incorporate multiple bases. So it could be race and sex, or disability and religion, or some other combination of those various types of bases that a person feels like they're at an intersectional point where they're being discriminated against for multiple reasons.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, not amazing that they've been discriminated against, that the numbers look
The numbers.
Have
right,
you
exactly.
know if they've shifted much, over the past decade?
They have. Disability has become more common of a basis. Sandy may speak to this, but in 2008, the federal Congress broadened the term of disability to include a lot more types of things than what employers or even employees considered to be disabilities before 2008. So since that time frame, and as that definition has caught on, we're definitely seeing a lot more disability cases. So it's kind of bumped sex back down to third, and disabilities crept up to number 2. I also want to mention in housing, disability is our number 1 case. It's probably about half the cases that we get in our housing side of the house at shack, so to speak. So okay. It's very prevalent there, the discrimination that's alleged.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the issues as far as race or gender or disability, but what employment issues do you typically see coming to the commission?
Yeah, so we see generally it's going to be a combination of things. Usually discrimination isn't just, a one-off. It's kind of built up over time. So someone might come to us and say, it started out as just microaggressions. It started out as intimidation and I felt targeted. But over time, it became suspension or discipline or terms and conditions like I wasn't giving training. And then maybe even results in termination. And a lot of times that's when we'll catch the charge, is because, even though this person's been feeling like they've been targeted, they haven't gone to that level of needing to contact us. Maybe they've complained internally, maybe nothing's happened, but usually it's that discharge, unfortunately, that causes them to make a phone call to us. And of course, we encourage people, if you're not seeing results at your employer after vocalizing your concerns, we're the next place to go, because if your employer isn't going to do it, come to us and we can investigate. That's why our state agency exists. Now, aside from the kind of buildup of the microaggressions to the discipline to the discharge, of course, we also see a lot of denials of accommodation. And I have to give WREN a lot of credit for all of the hard work that went into passing the Pregnancy Accommodations Act back in 2018. Now, I can't say that we've seen an onslaught of those accommodations charges, but they are starting to drip into the office as people find out more and more that their rights to the pregnancy restrictions that they've been given by their OB. And we've definitely started to see a lot more settlements occur in those charges that we've received, because employers may just not know that, hey, there's the ADA, but this woman's pregnant, she's not disabled. We don't know that we're supposed to accommodate them yet. And then we clue them in pretty fast that, yes, you do now have to accommodate those women that are pregnant without some sort of underlying disability that would prompt the ADA to set in. So we see a lot of different kinds of cases. It's really a wide gamut. But what I'm encouraged by is that, our state has been broadening what we want to take in at our level to investigate, to try to settle, and then if we need to use, the stick rather than the carrot and go after them in litigation.
Great, thank you. And Bethany, I think Leanne is competing with you for the craziest background.
Sorry.
On the call. No, it's fine. We love the little kitties. Thank you.
Sure.
So at ABLE, although people with disabilities make up about 15% of our state's population, we have one of the highest unemployment rates for disabled people in the nation. Wow. They're twice as likely to be unemployed, and we need to change this for the betterment of our own economy. People with disabilities can work, want to work, and bring valuable skills and talents to the workplace. And I know, Sandy, you'll probably talk about some of this too, but when someone has to live with a disability, the innovation that they have to come up with, right? The way that they navigate the world, those are skills that we're missing out when we're discriminating against them in the workplace. So I'd love for you to be able to tell us, some of the work that you do to support people with disabilities.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. And actually, we have the 6th highest unemployment rate for people with disabilities in our nation, which is just outrageous, right? And that's part of the reason why ABLE South Carolina exists. So ABLE South Carolina is a disability-led nonprofit that works with people with disabilities to empower them to lead their most independent life. And so that does obviously include employment. Employment gives a lot of us independence. And employment, I always say, where would you be if you did not work? What would your day look like if you did not work? Over 80% of our staff are people with disabilities. So we not only have that professional experience, but a lot of us also have that personal lived experience of being a person with a disability. And that really does make a difference when we talk with individuals. When individuals call us, I think it's rather funny. Sometimes folks will call and say, well, I can't work because I have a disability. Well, most of the time the person that answering the phone has a disability as well. So we'll kind of turn it on to them and be like, well, I have a disability too, and I work. So what's the issue, So that's a really interesting dynamic that we can kind of play in that. But I work with a variety of local and state and national partners to improve employment outcomes for people with disabilities in South Carolina. Because there's still a lot of employment barriers that exist and low expectations for people with disabilities in our state. Only 34% of people with disabilities are employed. And like you mentioned, Beth, this is really an untapped workforce that we can't afford to not utilize. The priority in our state is to care for people with disabilities, and we're actively working to change that narrative. We really believe, because we know the majority of us are people with disabilities, but we know that people with disabilities need support and not care. And it really starts with changing your assumptions about who people with disabilities are and who they're not. And so some of the ways that we're working with employers is that we work with employers to provide them training, technical assistance, and guidance in helping them hire and employ people with disabilities. We provide accessibility assessments to employers to ensure their physical environment and their digital content is more accessible, as well as connecting them with other employers through our business coalition to create that peer-to-peer mentoring through businesses. Oftentimes, it's really impactful for employers to hear from another employer about how they have implemented practices that have made them more inclusive to people with disabilities. We also work with disability service providers to identify and break down some of the systemic barriers in state agencies that's preventing people with disabilities in accessing employment services. And while there has been some improvements over the past couple of years, we still have a long way to go to achieve disability inclusion in South Carolina's workforce.
I love what you said about let's change that from caring for people to supporting people, right? It's really about finding out what their needs are so that they can be productive in the workplace. What are some of the laws that are written that affect those, people who are living with disabilities in the workplace?
Yeah, so there's actually several pieces of disability laws that influence employment, but the most comprehensive disability law is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is the ADA, which celebrated its 30th anniversary this year in July. So yeah, Leanne, I see her clapping. We were very excited about that. The ADA is the most comprehensive piece of disability legislation and law that we have. And it protects the civil rights of individuals with disabilities. Most people don't realize that with the Civil Rights Act did not include people with disabilities. So the ADA is really that civil rights law for people with disabilities. And this act was created to ensure that people with disabilities have equal access and opportunity like everyone else in all aspects of life. And it demands that people with disabilities be full participants in society, and that includes employment. One thing that we like to say at ABLE is that it's not about special treatment, but it is about equal treatment. You can't be special and equal. You have to choose. And so we want equal treatment. We don't want special treatment. And one thing that, Leanne, I'm glad you touched on this a bit, but I did want to mention that the ADA is broad in its definition of disability. And I think that that's why we're starting to see some more of those discrimination claims come in. I don't think that employers are inherently discriminating more against people with disabilities. I think that, that it's happened all along, but we're starting to see it more because folks are realizing what's going on and that they actually fit that definition of disabilities. So it includes people with all types of disabilities, like learning disabilities, like ADHD, or psychiatric disabilities such as depression and anxiety. And we've actually seen an increase of folks identifying as having a disability, and are also thinking that, from the long-term effects of COVID-19, that there will be an increase of folks with disabilities. And when most people think of a disability, they think of a visible disability, something that they can see. So I see you having a disability. They think of someone utilizing a wheelchair or someone being blind. However, the majority of disabilities are invisible. And we know that women may be more likely to have invisible disabilities, such as psychiatric disabilities. And the ADA has 5 titles, and Title I includes employment. And the ADA not only prevents employment discrimination for people with disabilities, but also ensures people with disabilities have access to reasonable accommodation. So some type of modification, tool, support that an individual may need to perform their job duties. And typically these accommodations cost nothing. So over 50% of accommodations cost nothing and allow employees with disabilities to perform their job duties to the same degree as others.
I'm glad that you brought up that invisible disabilities. I actually have an invisible disability myself. I have fibromyalgia, but I never thought, it's not one that's listed for, like, I can't get the Social Security disability, right? People who try to fight for that are denied. So how would someone know whether or not their disability is valid for accommodations in the workplace?
Yeah, basically, if they're needing any type of support, if they're needing any type of accommodation in the workplace, even if you don't need an accommodation, you could still qualify as having a disability under the ADA. But when we talk about employment, really when we look at accommodations is where kind of the rubber meets the road. So for example, if someone has a physical disability, a physical hidden disability like fibromyalgia, you may need a more flexible work schedule than someone else because you may have good days and bad days. And so that is something that, you could inform the employer that you do have a disability and that, you would need some type of accommodation. And typically when we talk with folks about this, we do ask them to, have some ideas in mind. It really needs to be an interactive process between the individual and the employer. But usually, the person with a disability, they've got that lived experience, right? They know what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And so it works best if they've got some ideas in mind about what accommodations they may need.
That's good. And then they can always contact you all at Able SC if they have some questions and they need that support, not care.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
I understand
exactly.
on the other end of that, there's an employer summit coming up where people can learn more. I'd love for you to tell us more about that and what kind of topics will be presented.
Yeah, so we're really excited. Our 5th annual Employer Summit is happening virtually on Wednesday, October 7th from 9:30 to 12. And this is an event for employers and HR professionals, and they will get a chance to hear from other employers on how they have strengthened their workforce by hiring people with disabilities. So we know that this can be tricky sometimes for employers to implement, and the summit really strives to give employers the tools needed to be an inclusive employer. Our keynote speaker will be President and CEO Tim Arnold from Colonial Life. And we'll also have a special guest speaker, retired Senator Tom Harkin, who co-authored the ADA. So we're really excited about that, especially considering that it's the 30th anniversary of the ADA. We also have a variety of breakout sessions that will focus on mental health in the workplace. That's really a hot topic this year, especially with everything all of us are going through with COVID-19. Accessibility, inclusive models for job instruction, and how to include disability in your business strategies. Employers will also have a chance to hear from disability service providers about how to connect with them for qualified job candidates with disabilities. So tickets are only $75, and that includes 2 hours of SHRM and HRCI credit for those HR professionals out there. And folks can register for the event and check out the agenda at our Hire Me SC website, hiremesc.org/employer summit. And I can put that in the chat. I did also want to mention, aside from the Employer Summit, we also offer 3 employer trainings through the Hire Me SC campaign. So these are really good introductions to disability and employment for employers. And our next training will actually be September 29th from 9:30 to 11. We typically hold these in person, but we had to switch just like everyone else and are now holding those virtual. So I can put that link for more information about that training in the comments as well.
Thank you. And what great timing that someone can start getting this training within this month. I also want to mention that the October Summit will align with National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And that's a month that's centered around the importance of hiring and retaining people with disabilities in the workforce. So thank you, Sandy. I want to pause and see if we have any questions or comments from the audience. If not, I've got a good burning question for you all, but let's see what the audience has for us. I'm just looking through the chat. All right, I don't see anything, so I will ask the question. The work that all of you do, the way that it's similar is that, you are looking at policies or looking at legislation, right, to make sure that there's equity in the workplace. Do you think that we will see equity as it comes to the issues of gender or disability or familial status or race? Do you think that we'll see equity in the workplace anytime soon?
Well, sometimes I say it would mean I wouldn't have a job but I would love to see that happen. But we are, 30 years since the ADA and 50 plus since Title VII. And while we've made strides, all those same problems that existed when those laws were passed are still there, and we've identified new ones.
Mhm.
So I don't know that we'll ever necessarily see the utopian workforce that I swear Bethany works in, but I would love for that to happen across the board. I think that we're pessimistically sorry. I think that we're still decades off from where we want to be and where we ought to be.
Yeah, unfortunately. And what I love about, I always say, when I was doing this work for an employer, I always say I was a diversity and inclusion consultant. I always said I wanted to work myself out of a job, right? I wanted to not be necessary. But like you mentioned, things are changing. I mean, I even think about the transgender population and how we weren't talking about this, even 10 years ago. And so as things change and, evolve over time, then unfortunately it becomes more issues in the workplace as it comes to bias and discrimination.
Right. And just not to hog the conversation, but, we just came off of the Me Too movement, really having a spotlight shown on it for a couple of strong years. And I can't tell you that sexual harassment in the workplace has ended. And actually, it's one of HUD's hot topics right now because of COVID and the vulnerability of a lot of women out there that might not have jobs and need a place to live with their families. So as much as we are focusing on the problems, it doesn't mean that they have just gone away.
Right. Wow. Okay, I see some
Sorry.
questions. No, that's great. And thank you for the honesty with that, right? That we have to realize this is a long journey. The work we're doing is continuing to build upon foundations that have already been built, but it's going to take several generations for us to get there. Thank you. I have a question from Sheila. If your 16-year-old has learning disabilities, how do you start him to prepare for the workforce?
I love this question, Sheila, because I used to work with youth with disabilities. So first of all, I would say treat him just like you would any other 16-year-old. Set those expectations high. Don't assume that just because he has a disability that he can't do. So if you've got another child, then you would likely give that child chores, right, around the house. Or you would expect that that child start looking for a job at 16, 17, 18 years old. Or you would expect that that child start training for the driver's license. So, set those expectations, very similar as a child without a disability would have. And I would also say, Sheila, if I can put my contact information in the chat, but if you want to reach out to me, we actually have a peer-to-peer youth support group. And so youth with disabilities, being able to meet other youth with disabilities that have been successful and kind of can help them in that way has been really powerful.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Bethany, as Abacus is a great example of the private sector centering equity. How can we as employees encourage a culture of equity in our workplaces? Do you have any tips for opening the conversation with our supervisors or HR?
Oh, that's a good question. So, when I think about how do we create that inclusivity and that culture of really a space where we've got diversity and inclusion and equity, I think so much of it does start with that conversation. So that it is going to come down to creating a space that is safe, that is open, that is welcoming of people posing questions, of people raising their hand and saying, you know what, my unique experience is so different from what yours is and yours is and yours is. And I think what we're seeing is that so oftentimes the people making the policies, and I certainly fall into this boat, are not living the same life as the people that are experiencing those policies. And so creating a place that is safe for people to have those conversations and to bring awareness, I think is a first step. And I think as employers, it is our responsibility to show up to those conversations, to be ready to listen, and to be really open to the fact that our team and the people we're working with and the people that are living, you know, these lives that are different from ours and having different experiences have a ton of amazing ideas. And so really coming to it saying, you know what, I don't have all the answers and I don't know how to solve this problem for you, but I would love to hear what your ideas are. And then continuing the conversation from there to how we can create solutions that support our team. And the only thing I'd add to that is making sure that the people that are at that decision-making table have, that there's diversity at that table, because we know we make better decisions when we are bringing a variety of viewpoints and a variety of perspectives. And so making sure it's not down to just one person, or it's not down to a whole group of people that have a pretty similar experience, but inviting people, you know, whether it's a subcommittee or a focus group, so we can get in the different perspectives and understand how we're best going to be able to support our entire team and not just a group of people.
Yeah, it's really, that's a true sign of leadership, is being able to say, I don't have the answers, but I know who to bring in the room to get the answers. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
This next question is for Leanne. With legislation being introduced regarding LGBTQ status and discrimination in South Carolina, do you see many cases regarding this now?
We don't see a lot of cases, and prior to the Bostic decision, which is a U.S. Supreme Court case, you've probably heard a little bit about it, but it said that within the definition of sex, you now include people who are filing charges based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So before that case, we weren't seeing a lot of charges, and the ones that we were, generally we would waive to the EEOC because they had already recognized those as defined within the term sex, those types of matters. Since Bostic, our commission has determined that we are going to retain those cases. Of course, we would feel a lot more comfortable if there was state legislation behind that. But we believe that based on that definition that is now within the Bostic case, we would have proper standing within a court to pursue a matter if it got to that point.
Okay, great, thank you. Sandy, with regard to people with disabilities, how is South Carolina doing with access to voting?
Okay. I'm going to be like, just like Bethany said, that you have to hand it over to the experts when you don't know this. I am not that in tune with voting. I'm all about employment on our side. So I will put Robbie Kopp at Able, South Carolina. He actually does a lot with our community access, and that includes voting. So I will put his email address in the chat. And anyone can reach out to him about that.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Bethany, I'm going to ask you this one. As the nature of the workplace shifts due to COVID and anticipating what will happen when we eventually try to return to normal, after all of this, do you see any unique workplace issues arising?
Unique workplace issues. So I don't know that I know exactly what that question may have in mind, but one thing that I do foresee a lot of companies needing to address and needing to be prepared for is this idea that we have now had this very extended period of time. You know, we're going on to 6 months of what this new normal is looking like. And the reality is that for many companies, there have been very serious adjustments to how they do work, how they interact with each other, how they show up in their workplace or not, and addressing, and it's worked. You know, things have not been perfect, but for a lot of companies, things have continued to move forward in a pretty successful way. And so being able to address, like, what is the balance of the accommodations that were made because we had this difficult situation, and what are we going to be able to, what is reasonable from a business perspective, what is best for our employees, what is best for the people that we work with, to be able to continue these policies that in most cases added flexibility. I think in a lot of ways, while this has been a very challenging time for women and for parents that have had children at home, that have lost childcare, that have been supporting aging parents where they weren't able to interact in the way they used to. But in many ways, the policies have been accommodating for women because it has been such a difficult situation. And so deciding what of these policies that we figured out a way to make work, can we continue to make work to support women going forward?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. All right, Leanne, they're kind of the same, so I'm going to put these questions together. Say someone wants to complain, but it hasn't reached the level of discharge. What types of approaches should they use so that they don't get punished by their company? And then someone else asked, what protections does South Carolina have in place for whistleblowers? So I felt like they could maybe go together.
Right. So, I'm looking at it in terms of a discrimination complaint solely. That's, the nature of my. So whistleblowers could incorporate lots of things, but in terms of discrimination issues, either I'm being discriminated against or I feel a coworker's being discriminated against. If you complain to your employer, they are not lawfully allowed to retaliate against you because of that complaint. So if to file internally, there's usually some sort of policy that most employers would have that shows how you complain to someone that you feel comfortable complaining to. It wouldn't, of course, be your harasser that you would want to complain to, because what good would that likely do? But usually there's going to be some process that the employee can take internally to make their formal complaint. And then there should be something that happens after that, right? So it should be an investigation or response from your HR division, or something that occurs once that complaint has been verbalized. If nothing happens, if no change is made, if no explanation is given, if no interactive process is had, for example, in an accommodation setting, then I think that's when it would be appropriate to contact either our agency or an attorney if you felt more comfortable with that, so you would know the next steps to take in order to get the relief that you would need. And again, once the employer is aware that you're making a complaint, either under our law, Title VII, the ADA, the ADEA, retaliation is unlawful after that because that complaint has been made. That doesn't mean that if you stop showing work, they can't discharge you. But you can't be treated differently for the reason that you filed the complaint internally or with us.
Thank you. And then this is the last question. Before we go into our breakouts, I'll ask Sandy. How can we as employees support individuals with disabilities as coworkers? Or how can we even as citizens do our part in helping?
Yeah. So first, I would say that you support individuals with disabilities as coworkers, just like you would any other coworker, right? Think about what makes you a good coworker. Someone that someone else can depend on and lean on and support. Someone that sometimes you really see as a friend in the workplace. That's what people with disabilities need as well. Aside from that may be a little bit different. I would say that if you are close to someone in the workplace and you really feel like they would benefit from any type of accommodation, if you feel comfortable, you may want to bring that up. You may want to do some digging or some research yourself about the ADA, or maybe even want to let them know about some of the agencies like ABLE South Carolina that's here to support them. And then as far as what South Carolina citizens can do in helping, I would say, continue to educate yourself about the barriers that people with disabilities face, not only in employment, but also some of these other factors we mentioned briefly, but housing, voting, access, healthcare. There's tons of barriers that people with disabilities face. As well, you know, if you're interested in employment in particular, we do have the South Carolina Disability Employment Coalition that we have been leading since 2014, and you can email me. I put my email in the chat, but you can email me if you want some more information about that. That's open to anyone to help you learn more about some of those barriers and how we're actively working to decrease those barriers.
Thank you. Ladies, thank you all so much for your participation, for answering the questions. We didn't get to all of the questions in the chat, but I ask you all, if you have time, perhaps look in there and see which ones are addressed to you and see if perhaps you could write a response for that. But now I'm going to ask Ashley to talk to us about how the breakouts are going to work.
Thank you, Beth. And just thank you again to you, Beth, for moderating, and the panelists for such an amazing discussion. I took myself off camera because I truly was smiling so much that I had folks sending like, hey, can you turn your camera off? You're distracting, because I was so into it. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I truly appreciate everything. And for those who put comments and questions in the chat, the dialogue's not over. We still have time together. So if you can stay with us, we're actually going to go into breakout sessions, and each breakout room has the exact same set of questions. We're going to build community with each other and just have a dialogue around work and the workplace, and the support that you want or need or already have to give tips to folks. What we're going to do for those breakout sessions is we're actually going to take a break right now. So it's nighttime. We all probably need another glass of water or wine if you're having it, a bathroom break. And our kind of control panel is going to separate people out just randomly into breakout rooms. A WREN staffer is going to moderate those, but I'll let you know you're going to basically take your break and then be back in a breakout room, magic of Zoom. So you're going to want to make sure that your video and your microphone are off, and you're going to have to be able to go in the breakout sessions, be able to click the button that Courtney Thomas just put into the chat. I hope that all works based on my instructions, and if not, I will come back on and give additional instructions. But with that, I thank our panelists for being with us. You can stay for the breakouts, or just thank you for your time, and we appreciate you. And everyone else, you can take your break, and I'll see you in the breakouts.
How long is the break, Ashley?
It is a 10-minute break, unless
All right.
somebody wants to correct me.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all.